Dutch Fairy Tales for Young Folks. The Mouldy Penny. Gold makes a woman penny white, said the Dutch in the days when fairies were plentiful and often in their thoughts. What did the proverb mean? Who ever saw a white penny? Well, that was long ago, when pennies were white, because they were then made of silver. Each one was worth a denarii, which was a coin worth about a shilling, or a quarter of a dollar. As the Dutch had pounds, shillings and pence, before the English had them. We see what D in the signs S. D means, that is, a denarii, or a white penny, made of silver. In the old days, before the Dutch had houses with glass windows or clothes of cloth or linen, or hats or shoes, cows and horses, or butter and cheese, they knew nothing of money and they cared less. Almost everything, even the land, was owned in common by all. Their wants were few. Whenever they needed anything from other countries they swapped or bartered. In this way they traded salt for furs or fish for iron. But when they met with, or had to fight, another tribe that was stronger or richer, or knew more than they did, they required other things, which the forests and waters could not furnish. So, by and by, peddlers and merchants came up from the south. They brought new and strange articles, such as mirrors, jewelry, clothes, and pretty things, which the girls and women wanted, and had begged their daddies and husbands to get for them. For the men, they brought iron tools and better weapons, improved traps, to catch wild beasts, and wagons, with wheels that had spokes. When regular trade began, it became necessary to have money of some kind. Then coins of gold, silver, and copper were seen in the towns and villages, and even in the woods and on the heaths of Holland. Yet there was a good deal that was strange and mysterious about these round, shining bits of metal, called money. Money. What is money? Asked many a proud warrior disdainfully. Then the wise men explained to the fighting men that money was named after Juno Moneta, a goddess in Rome. She told men that no one would ever want for money who was honest and just. Then, by and by, the mint was in her temple and money was coined there. Then, later, in Holland, the word meant money. But many people, who wanted to get rich quickly, worshipped her. In time, however, the word gold meant money in general. When a great ruler, named Charlemagne, conquered or made treaties with our ancestors, he allowed them to have mints and to coin money. Then, again, it seemed wonderful how the peddlers and the goldsmiths, and the men called Lombards, strange, long-bearded men from the south, who came among the Dutch, grew rich faster than the workpeople. They seemed to amass gold simply by handling money. When a man who knew what a silver penny would do, made a present of one to his wife, her face lighted up with joy. So in time, the word penny white meant the smiling face of a happy woman. Yet it was also noticed that the more people had, the more they wanted. The girls and boys quickly found that money would buy what the peddlers brought. In the towns, shops sprang up, in which were many curious things, which tempted people to buy. Some tried to spend their money and keep it to eat their cake and have it also, but they soon found that they could not do this. There were still many foolish, as well as wise people, in the land. Even during the new time of money, a few saved their coins and were happy in giving some to the poor and needy. Many fathers had what was called a sparepot, or home savings bank, and taught their children the right use of money. It began to be the custom for people to have family names, so that a girl was not merely the daughter of so-and-so, nor a boy the son of a certain father. In the selection of names, those which had the word penny in them proved to be very popular. To keep a coin in the little home bank, without spending it, long enough for it to gather mold, which it did easily in the damp climate of Holland, that is, to darken and get a crust on, it was considered a great virtue in the owner. This showed that the owner had a strong mind and power of self-control. So the name, Schimmelpennig, or Mouldy Penny, became honorable, because such people were wise and often kind and good. They did not waste their money, but made good use of it. On the other hand, were some mean and stingy folks, who liked to hear the coins jingle. Instead of wisely spending their cash, or trading with it, they hoarded their coins, that is, they hid them away in a stocking, or a purse, or in a jar, or a cracked cooking pot, that couldn't be used. Often they put it away somewhere in the chimney, behind a loose brick. Then, at night, when no one was looking, these miserly folks counted, rubbed, jingled, and gloated over the shining coins and never helped anybody. So there grew up 3 sorts of people, called the thrifty, the spendthrifts, and the misers. These last were the meanest and most disliked of all. Others, again, hid their money away, so as to have some, when sick or old, and they talked about it. No one found fault with these, though some laughed, and said, "A penny in the savings jar makes more noise than when it is full of gold." Even when folks got married, they were exhorted by the minister to save money, so as to have something to give to the poor. Now when the fairies, that worked down underground, heard that the Dutch had learned the use of money, and had even built a mint to stamp the metal, they held a feast to talk over what they should do to help or harm. In any event, they wanted to have some fun with the mortals above ground. That has always been the way with K-abouters. They are in for fun, first, last, and always. So, with punches and hammers, they made counterfeit money. Then, in league with the elves, they began also to delude misers, and make them believe that much money makes men happy. A long time after the mint had been built, 2 K-abouters met to talk over their adventures. "It is wonderful what fools these creatures called men are," said the first one. "There's old Vrek. He has been hoarding coins for the last 50 years. Now, he has a pile of gold in guilders and stivers. But there's hardly anything of his old self left. His soul is as small as a shrimp. I whispered to him not to let out his money in trade, but to keep it shut up. His strong box is full to bursting, but what went into the chest has oozed out of the man. He died last night, and hardly anybody considers him worth burying." Someone on the street today asked what Vrek had left behind. The answer was, "Nothing, he took it all with him, for he had so little to take." "That's jolly," said the older kabouter, who was a wicked-looking fellow. "I'll get some fun out of this. To shrivel up souls will be my business henceforth. There's nothing like this newfangled business of getting money. That will do it so surely." So this ugly old imp went snooping around, as the Dutch say, about people who sneak and dodge in and out of places to which they ought not to go, and in houses where they should not be found. This imp's purpose was to make men crazy on the subject of making money when they tried, as many of them did, to get rich quickly in mean ways. Sorry to tell, the imp found a good many promising specimens to work upon at his business of making some wise men foolish. He taught them to take out of their souls what they hoarded away. To such fellows, when they became misers, he gave the name of Shim, which means a shadow. It was believed by some people that such shriveled-up wretches had no bowels. Soon after this, a great meeting of K-abouters was held in the dark realms below ground. Each one told what he had been doing on the earth. After the little imps had reported, the chief kabouter, when his turn came, cried out, "I shall tell of 3 brothers, and what each one did with the first silver penny he earned." "Go on," they all cried. "I've caught one Shim young. He married a wife only last year, but he won't give her 1 gulden a year to dress on. He skimps the table, pares the cheese till the rind is as thin as paper, and makes her live on skim milk and barley. Besides this, he won't help the poor with a stiver. I saw him put away a bright and shining silver penny, fresh from the mint. He hid coin and pocketbook in the bricks of a chimney. So I climbed down from the roof, seized both and ran away. I smeared the purse with wax and hid it in the thick rib of a boat, by the wharf. There the penny will gather mold enough." Ha, ha, ha. At this, the little imps broke out into a titter that sounded like the cackle of a hen trying to tell she had laid an egg. "Good for you. Serves the old Shim right," said a good kabouter, who loved to help human beings. "Now, I'll tell you about his brother, who has a wife and baby. He feeds and clothes them well, and takes good care of his old mother. Almost every week he helps some poor little boy or girl that has no mother or father. I heard him say he wished he could take care of poor orphans. So, when he was asleep, at night, I whispered in his ear and made him dream. Put away your coin where it won't get moldy, and show that a penny that keeps moving is not like a rolling stone that gathers no moss. Deliver it to the goldsmiths for interest, and leave it in your will to increase, until it becomes a great sum. Then, long after you are dead, the money you have saved and left for the poor weezies. Orphans will build a house for them. It will furnish food and beds and pay for nurses that will care for them. And good women who will be like mothers. Other folks, seeing what you have done, will build orphan houses. Then we shall have a Wees House orphan asylum in every town. No child, without a father or mother, in all Holland, will have to cry for milk or bread. Don't let your penny mold. The third brother, named Spill Penny, woke up on the same morning with a headache. He remembered that he had spent his silver penny at the gin house, buying drinks for a lot of worthless fellows like himself. He and his wife, with little to eat, had to wear ragged clothes, and the baby had not one toy to play with. When his wife gently chided him, he ran out of the house in bad humor. Going to the tap room, he ordered a drink of what we call Dutch courage, that is, a glass of gin, and drank it down. Then what do you think he did? Tell us, cried the imps uproariously. He went into a clothing house, bought a suit of clothes, and had it charge. That's it. I've known others like him, said an old imp. Now it was Kermis Day in the village, and all that afternoon and evening this spendthrift was roistering with his fellow Zoopzaks, boon companions. With them, it was always drunk, always dry. Near midnight, being too full of gin, he stumbled in the gutter, struck his head on the curb, and fell down senseless. Her husband not coming home that night, the distracted wife went out early in the morning. She found several men lying asleep on the sidewalks or in the gutters. She turned each one over, just as she did buckwheat cakes on the griddle, to see if this man or that was hers. At last she discovered her worthless husband, but no shaking or pulling could awake him. He was dead. Now there was a covetous undertaker in town, who carted away the corpse. And then told the widow that she must spend much money on the funeral, in order to have her husband buried properly, or else the tongues of the neighbors would wag. So the poor woman had to sell her cow, the only thing she had, and was left poorer than ever. That was the end of Spill Penny. A jolly story, cried the K-abouters in chorus. Served him right. Now tell us about Wreck the Miser. Go on. Well, the saying, much coin, much care, is hardly true of him, for I and my trusty helpers ran away with all he had. With his first silver penny he began to hoard his money. He has been hunting for years for that penny, but has not found it. It will be rather mouldy, should he find it, but that he never will. Why not? Asked a young imp. For a good reason. He would not pay his boatmen their wages. So they struck, and refused to work. When he tried to sail his own boat, it toppled over and sunk, and Wreck was drowned. His wife was saved the expenses of a funeral, for his carcass was never found, and the covetous undertaker lost a job. What of the third one? They asked. Oh, Mynheer Eerlijk, you mean? No harm can come to him. Everybody loves him and he cares for the orphans. There will be no Mouldy Penny in his house. Then the meeting broke up. The good K-abouters were happy. The bad ones, the imps, were sorry to miss what they hoped would be a jolly story. When 1,000 years passed away and the age of newspapers and copper pennies had come, there were no descendants of the two brothers Spill Penny and Shim. But of Mynheer Eerlijk there were as many as the years that had flown since he made a will. In this document, he ordered that his money, in guilders of gold and pennies of silver, should remain at compound interest for 400 years. In time, the ever-increasing sum passed from the goldsmiths to the bankers, and kept on growing enormously. At last this large fortune was spent in building hundreds of homes for orphans. According to his wish, each girl in the asylum dressed in clothes that were of the colors on the city arms. In Amsterdam, for example, each orphan child's frock is half red and half black, with white aprons. And the linen and lace caps are very neat and becoming to their rosy faces. In Friesland, where golden hair and apple blossom cheeks are so often seen with the white lace and linen, someone has called the orphan girls apples of gold in pictures of silver. Among the many glories of the Netherlands is her care for the aged and the orphans. One of the 30 generations of the Eerlijks read one day in the newspaper. Last week, while digging a very deep canal, some workman struck his pickaxe against timbers that were black with age, and nearly as hard as stone. These, on being brought up, showed that they were the ribs of an ancient boat. Learned men say that there was once a river here, which long since dried up. All the pieces of the boat were recovered, and, under the skillful hands of our ship carpenters, have been put together. And the whole vessel is now set up and on view in our museum. We'll go down tomorrow on our way home from school, and see the curiosity," cried one of the earlick boys, clapping his hands. "Wait," said his father, "there's more in the story." Today, the janitor of the museum, while examining a wide crack in one of the ribs, which was covered with wax, picked this substance away. He poked his finger in the crack, and finding something soft, pulled it out. It was a rough leather purse, inside of which was a coin, moldy with age and dark as the wood. Even after cleaning it with acid, it was hard to read what was stamped on it. But, strange to say, the face of the coin had left its impression on the leather, which had been covered with wax. From this, though the metal of the coin was black, and the mold thick on the coin, what they saw showed that it was a silver penny of the age of Charlemagne, or the 9th century. Charlemagne is French, father, but we call him Carol de Groot, or Charles the Great. Yes, my son. Don't you hear Carol's clock, the curfew sounding? 'Tis time for little folks to go to bed. The golden helmet. For centuries, more than can be counted on the fingers of both hands, the maidens and mothers of Friesland have worn a helmet of gold covering the crown and back of their heads, and with golden rosettes at each ear. It marks the Frisian girl or woman. She is thus known by this head-dress as belonging to a glorious country that has never been conquered and is proudly called Free Frisia. It is a relic of the age of gold, when this precious metal was used in 1,000 forms, not seen today. Of how and why the golden helmet is worn, this is the story. In days gone by, when forests covered the land and bears and wolves were plentiful, there were no churches in Friesland. The people were pagans and all worshipped Woden, whom the Frisians called Fos Ite. Certain trees were sacred to him. When a baby was ill, or grown people had a disease which medicine could not help, they laid the sick one at the foot of the holy tree, hoping for health soon to come. But, should the patient die under the tree, then the sorrowful friends were made glad, if the leaves of the tree fell upon the corpse. It was death to any person who touched the sacred tree with an axe, or made kindling wood, even of its branches. Now among the wild people of the north, who ate acorns and were clothed in the skins of animals, there came, from the Christian lands of the south, a singer with his harp. Invited to the royal court, he sang sweet songs. To these the king's daughter listened with delight, until the tears, first of sorrow and then of joy, rolled down her lovely cheeks. This maiden was the pride of her father, because of her sweet temper and willing spirit, while all the people boasted of her beauty. Her eyes were of the color of a sky without clouds. No spring flower could equal the pink and rose in her cheeks. Her lips were like the red coral, which the shipmen brought from distant shores. Her long tresses rivaled gold in their glory. And, because her father worshipped Fos Ite, the god of justice, and his daughter was always so fair to all her playmates, he, in his pride of her, gave her the name Fos Te Di Na, that is, the darling of Fos Ite, or the Lady of Justice. The singer from the south sang a new song, and when he played upon his harp his music was apt to be soft and low, sometimes sad, even, and often appealing. It was so much finer, and oh, so different, from what the gleemen and harpers in the king's court usually rendered for the listening warriors. Instead of being about fighting in battle, or the hunting of wolves and bears, of stags and the aurochs, it was of healing the sick and helping the weak. In place of battles and the exploits of warlords, in fighting and killing Danes, the harper's whole story was of other things and about gentle people. He sang neither of war, nor of the chase, nor of fighting gods, nor of the storm maidens, that carry up to the sky, and into the hall of Woden, the souls of the slain on the battlefield. The singer sang of the loving Father in heaven, who sent his dear Son to earth to live and die, that men might be saved. He made music with voice and instrument about love, and hope, and kindness to the sick and poor, of charity to widows and to orphans, and about the delights of doing good. He closed by telling the story of the crown of thorns, how wicked men nailed this good prophet to a cross, and how, when tender-hearted women wept, the holy teacher told them not to weep for him, but for themselves and their children. This mighty lord of noble thoughts and words lived what he taught. He showed greatness in the hour of death, by first remembering his mother, and then by forgiving his enemies. What? Forgive an enemy? Forgive even the Danes? What horrible doctrine do we hear? Cried the men of war. Let us kill this singer from the south. And they beat their swords on their metal shields, till the clangor was deafening. The great hall rang with echoes of the din, as if for battle. The Druids, or pagan priests, even more angry, applauded the action of the fighting men. But Foste Dee Na rushed forward to shield the harper, and her long golden hair covered him. No, said the king to his warriors. This man is my guest. I invited him and he shall be safe here. Sullen and bitter in their hearts, both priests and warmen left the hall, breathing out revenge and feeling bound to kill the singer. Soon all were quiet in slumber, for the hour was late. Why were the pagan followers of the king so angry with the singer? The answer to this question is a story in itself. Only 3 days before, a party of Christian Danes had been taken prisoners in the forest. They had come, peaceably and without arms, into the country for they wanted to tell the Frisians about the new religion, which they had themselves received. In the cold night air, they had, unwittingly, cut off some of the dead branches of a tree sacred to the god Fossite to kindle a fire. A spy, who had closely watched them, ran and told his chief. Now, the Christian Danes were prisoners and would be given to the hungry wolves to be torn to pieces. That was the law concerning sacrilege against the trees of the gods. Some of the Frisians had been to Rome, the eternal city, and had there learned, from the cruel Romans, how to build great enclosures, not of stone but of wood. Here, on holidays, they gave their prisoners of war to the wild beasts, for the amusement of thousands of the people. The Frisians could get no lions or tigers, for these fierce brutes live in hot countries. But they sent hundreds of hunters into the woods for many miles around. These bold fellows drove the deer, bears, wolves, and the aurochs within an ever-narrowing circle towards the pits. Into these, dug deep in the ground and covered with branches and leaves, the animals fell down and were hauled out with ropes. The deer were kept for their meat, but the bears and wolves were shut up, in pens, facing the great enclosure. When maddened with hunger, these ravenous beasts of prey were to be let loose on the Christian Danes. Several aurochs, made furious by being goaded with pointed sticks, or pricked by spears, were to rush out and trample the poor victims to death. The heart of the beautiful Foste Dee Na, who had heard the songs of the singer of faith in the one God and love for his creatures, was deeply touched. She resolved to set the captives free. Being a king's daughter, she was brave as a man. So, at midnight, calling a trusty maidservant, she, with a horn lantern, went out secretly to the prison pen. She unbolted the door, and, in the name of their God and hers, she bade the prisoners return to their native land. How the wolves in their pen did roar, when, on the night breeze, they sniffed the presence of a newcomer. They hoped for food, but got none. The next morning, when the crowd assembled, but found that they were to be cheated of their bloody sport, they raged and howled. Coming to the king, they demanded his daughter's punishment. The pagan priests declared that the gods had been insulted, and that their anger would fall on the whole tribe, because of the injury done to their sacred tree. The hunters swore they would invade the Danes' land and burn all their churches. Foste Dee Na was summoned before the council of the priests, who were to decide on the punishment due her. Being a king's daughter, they could not put her to death by throwing her to the wolves. Even as the white-bearded high priest spoke, the beautiful girl heard the fierce creatures howling, until her blood curdled, but she was brave and would not recant. In vain they threatened the maiden, and invoked the wrath of the gods upon her. Bravely she declared that she would suffer, as her lord did, rather than deny him. So be it, cried the high priest. Your own words are your sentence. You shall wear a crown of thorns. Foste Dee Na was dismissed. Then the old men sat long, in brooding over what should be done. They feared the gods, but were afraid, also, to provoke their ruler to wrath. They finally decided that the maiden's life should be spared, but that for a whole day, from sunrise to sunset. She should stand in the marketplace, with a crown of sharp thorns pressed down hard upon her head. The crowd should be allowed to revile her for being a Christian and none be punished. But no vile language was to be allowed, or stones or sticks were to be thrown at her. Foste Dee Na refused to beg for mercy and bravely faced the ordeal. She dressed herself in white garments, made from the does and fawns, free creatures of the forest, and unbound her golden tresses. Then she walked with a firm step to the center of the marketplace. "Bring the thorn crown for the blasphemer of Fossite," cried the high priest. This given to him, the king's daughter kneeled, and the angry old man, his eyes blazing like fire, pressed the sharp thorns slowly, down and hard, upon the maiden's brow. Quickly the red blood trickled down over her golden hair and face. Then in long, narrow lines of red, the drops fell, until the crimson stains were seen over the back, front, and sides of her white garments. But without wincing, the brave girl stood up, and all day long, while the crowd howled, in honor of their gods, and rough fellows jeered at her, Foss-te-dee-na was silent and patient, like her great example. Inwardly, she prayed the Father of all to pardon and forgive. There were not a few who pitied the bleeding maiden wearing the cruel crown, that drew the blood that stained her shining hair and once white clothing. Years passed by and a great change came over land and people. The very scars on Foss-te-dee-na's forehead softened the hearts of the people. Thousands of them heard the words of the good missionaries. Churches arose, on which was seen the shining cross. Idols were abolished and the trees, once sacred to the old gods, were cut down. Meadows, rich with cows, smiled where wolves had roamed. The changes, even in 10 years, were like those in a fairy tale. Best of all, a Christian prince from the south, grandson of Charlemagne, fell in love with Foss-te-dee-na, now queen of the country. He sought her hand, and won her heart, and the date for the marriage was fixed. It was a great day for Free Frisia. The wedding was to be in a new church, built on the very spot where Foss-te-dee-na had stood, in pain and sorrow, when the crown of thorns was pressed upon her brow. On that morning, a bevy of pretty maidens, all dressed in white, came in procession to the palace. One of them bore in her hands a golden crown, with plates coming down over the forehead and temples. It was made in such a way that, like a helmet, it completely covered and concealed the scars of the sovereign lady. So Foss-te-dee-na was married, with the golden helmet on her head. But which, asked some, was the more glorious, her long tresses, floating down her back, or the shining crown above it? Few could be sure in making answer. Instead of a choir singing hymns, the harper, who had once played in the king's hall, now an older man, had been summoned, with his harp, to sing in solo. In joyous spirits, he rendered into the sweet Frisian tongue 2 tributes in song to the crowned and glorified Lord of all. One praised the young guest at the wedding at Cana, friend of man, who turned water into wine; the other, the great captain of our salvation, who, in full manly strength, suffered, thorn-crowned, for us all. Then the solemn silence, that followed the song, was broken by the bride's coming out of the church. Though by herself alone, without adornment, Foss-te-dee-na was a vision of beauty. Her head covering looked so pretty, and the golden helmet was so becoming, that other maidens, also, when betrothed, wished to wear it. It became the fashion for Christian brides, on their wedding days, to put on this glorified crown of thorns. All the jewelers approved of the new bridal headdress, and in time this golden ornament was worn in Friesland every day. Thus it has come to pass that the Frisian helmet, which is the glorified crown of thorns, is, in one form or another, worn even in our day. When Foss-te-dee-na's first child, a boy, was born, the happy parents named him William, which is only another word for gilt helm. Out from this northern region, and into all the 17 provinces of the Netherlands, the custom spread. In one way or another, one can discern, in the headdresses or costumes of the Dutch and Flemish women, the relics of ancient history. When Her Majesty, the Dutch Queen, visits the Frisians in the old land of the north, which her fathers held so dear, she, out of compliment to Free Frisia, wears the ancient costume, surmounted by the golden helm. Those who know the origin of the name Wilhelmina read in it the true meaning, which is the sovereign lady of the golden helm. When Wheat Worked Woe. Many a day has the storyteller wandered along the dikes, which overlook the Zuiderzee. Once there were fertile fields, and scores of towns, where water now covers all. Then fleets of ships sailed on the bosom of Lake Flevo, and in the river which ran into the sea. Bright and beautiful cities dotted the shores, and church bells chimed merrily for the bridal, or tolled in sympathy for the sorrowing. Many were the festal days, because of the wealth, which the ships brought from lands near and far. But today the waters roll over the spot and, the dead cities of the Zuiderzee, are a proverb. Yet all are not dead, in one and the same sense. Some lie far down under the waves, their very names forgotten, because of the ocean's flood, which in one night, centuries ago, rushed in to destroy. Others languished, because wealth came no longer in the ships, and the seaports dried up. And one, because of a foolish woman, instead of holding thousands of homes and people, is today only a village nestling behind the dikes. It holds a few hundred people and only a fragment of land remains of its once great area. In the distant ages of ice and gravel, when the long and high glaciers of Norway poked their cold noses into Friesland, Stavoren held the shrine of Stavo, the storm god. The people were very poor, but many pilgrims came to worship at Stavo's altars. After the new religion came into the land, wealth increased, because the ships traded with the warm lands in the south. A great city sprang up, to which the counts of Holland granted a charter, with privileges second to none. It was written that Stavoren should have the same freedom which a free city enjoys from this side of the mountains, the Alps, to the sea. Then there came an age of gold in Stavoren. People were so rich that the bolts and hinges and the keys and locks of their doors were made of this precious yellow metal. In some of the houses, the parlor floor was paved with ducats from Spain. Now in this city lived a married couple, whose wealth came from the ships. The man, a merchant, was a simple-hearted and honest fellow, who worked hard and was easily pleased. But his wife was discontented, always peevish and never satisfied with anything. Even her neighbors grew tired of her whining and complaints. They declared that on her tombstone should be carved these words. She wanted something else. Now on every voyage, made by the many ships he owned, the merchant charged his captains to bring home something rare and fine, as a present to his wife. Some pretty carving or picture, a roll of silk for a dress, a lace collar, a bit of splendid tapestry, a shining jewel, or, it may be, a singing bird, a strange animal for a pet. A barrel of fruit or a box of sweetmeats was sure to be brought. With such gifts, whether large or small, the husband hoped to please his wife. But in this good purpose, he could never succeed. So he began to think that it was his own fault. Being only a man, he could not tell what a woman wanted. So he resolved to try his own wits and tastes, to see if he could meet his wife's desires. One day, when one of his best captains was about to sail on a voyage to the northeast, to Danzig, which is almost as far as Russia, he inquired of his bad-tempered Vrow what he should bring her. "I want the best thing in the world," said she. "Now this time, do bring it to me." The merchant was now very happy. He told the captain to seek out and bring back what he himself might think was the best thing on earth, but to make sure, he must buy a cargo of wheat. The skipper went on board, hoisted anchor and set sail. Using his man's wits, he also decided that wheat, which makes bread, was the very thing to be desired. In talking to his mates and sailors, they agreed with him. Thus, all the men, in this matter, were of one mind, and the captain dreamed only of jolly times when on shore. On other voyages, when he had hunted around for curiosities to please the wife of the boss, he had many and anxious thoughts, but now, he was carefree. In Danzig, all the ship's men had a good time, for the captain made "god koop," a fine bargain. Then the vessel, richly loaded with grain, turned its prow homeward. Arriving at Stavoren, the skipper reported to the merchant, to tell him of much money made, of a sound cargo obtained, of safe arrival, and, above all, plenty of what would please his wife, for what on earth could be more valuable than wheat, which makes bread, the staff of life. At lunchtime, when the merchant came home, his wife wanted to know what made him look so joyful. Had he made "god koop" that day? Usually, at mealtime, this quiet man hardly spoke 2 words an hour. To tell the truth, he sometimes irritated his wife because of his silence, but today he was voluble. The man of wealth answered, "I have a joyful surprise for you. I cannot tell you now. You must come with me and see." After lunch, he took his wife on board the ship, giving a wink of his eye to the skipper, who nodded to the sailors, and then the stout fellows opened the hatches. There, loaded to the very deck, was the precious grain. The merchant looked up, expecting to see and hear his wife clap her hands with joy. But the greedy woman turned her back on him, and flew into a rage. "Throw it all overboard, into the water," she screamed. "You wretch, you have deceived me." The husband tried to calm her and explain that it was his thought to get wheat, as the world's best gift, hoping thus to please her. At that moment, some hungry beggars standing on the wharf heard the lady's loud voice, and falling on their knees cried to her, "Please, madam, give us some of this wheat, we are starving." "Yes, lady, and there are many poor in Stavoren, in spite of all its gold," said the captain. "Why not divide this wheat among the needy, if you are greatly disappointed? You will win praise for yourself. In the name of God, forgive my boldness, and do as I ask. Then, on the next voyage, I shall sail as far as China and will get you anything you ask." But the angry woman would listen to no one. She stayed on the ship, urging on the sailors, with their shovels, until every kernel was cast overboard. "Never again will I try to please you," said her husband. "The hungry will curse you, and you may yet suffer for food, because of this willful waste, which will make waffle want. Even you will suffer." She listened at first in silence, and then put her fingers in her ears to hear no more. Proud of her riches, with her voice in a high key, she shouted, "I ever want? What folly to say so! I am too rich." Then, to show her contempt for such words, she slipped off a ring from her finger and threw it into the waters of the harbor. Her husband almost died of grief and shame, when he saw that it was her wedding ring, which she had cast overboard. "Hear you all. When that ring comes back to me, I shall be hungry and not before," said she, loud enough to be heard on ship, wharf, and street. Gathering up her skirts, she stepped upon the gangway, tripping to the shore, and past the poor people, who looked at her in mingled hate and fear. Then haughtily, she strode to her costly mansion. Now to celebrate the expected new triumph and to show off her wealth and luxury, with the numerous curiosities brought her from many lands. The proud lady had already invited a score of guests. When they were all seated, the first course of soup was served in silver dishes, which everyone admired. As the fish was about to be brought in, to be eaten off golden plates, the butler begged the lady's permission to bring in first, from the chief cook, something rare and wonderful, that he had found in the mouth of the fish, which was waiting, already garnished, on the big dish. Not dreaming what it might be, the hostess clapped her hands in glee, saying to those at the table, "Perhaps now, at last, I shall get what I have long waited for, the best thing in the world." "We shall all hope so," the guests responded in chorus. But when the chief cook came into the banquet hall, and, bowing low, held before his mistress a golden salver, with a finger ring on it, the proud lady turned pale. It was the very ring which, in her anger, she had tossed overboard the day before. To add to her shame, she saw from the look of horror on their faces, that the guests had recognized the fact that it was her wedding token. This was only the beginning of troubles. That night, her husband died of grief and vexation. The next day, the warehouses, stored with valuable merchandise of all sorts, were burned to the ground. Before her husband had been decently buried, a great tempest blew down from the north, and news came that 4 of his ships had been wrecked. Their sailors hardly escaped with their lives, and both they and their families in Stavoren were now clamoring for bread. Even when she put on her weeds of grief, these did not protect the widow from her late husband's creditors. She had to sell her house and all that was in it, to satisfy them and pay her debts. She had even to pawn her ring to the Lombards, the goldsmiths of the town, to buy money for bread. Now that she was poor, none of the former rich folks, who had come to her grand dinners, would look at her. She had even to beg her bread on the streets for who wanted to help the woman who wasted wheat. She was glad to go to the cow stalls, and eat what the cattle left. Before the year ended, she was found dead in a stable, in rags and starvation. Thus her miserable life ended. Without a funeral, but borne on a bier, by 2 men, she was buried at the expense of the city, in the potter's field. But even this was not the end of the fruits of her wickedness, for the evil she did lived after her. It was found that, from some mysterious cause, a sandbar was forming in the river. This prevented the ships from coming up to the docks. With its trade stopped, the city grew poorer every day. What was the matter? By and by, at low tide, some fishermen saw a green field under the surface of the harbor. It was not a garden of seaweed, for instead of leaves whirling with the tide, there were stalks that stood up high. The wheat had sprouted and taken root. In another month the tops of these stalks were visible above the water. But in such soil as sand, the wheat had reverted to its wild state. It was good for nothing, but only did harm. For, while producing no grain for food, it held together the sand, which rolled down the river and had come all the way from the Alps to the ocean. Of old, this went out to sea and kept the harbor scoured clean, so that the ships came clear up to the wharves. Then, on many a morning, a wealthy merchant, whose house was close to the docks, looked out of his window to find the prows of his richly laden ships poked almost into his bedroom, and he liked it. Venturesome boys even climbed from their cots down the bowsprits, onto the deck of their fathers' vessels. Of such sons, the fathers were proud, knowing that they would make brave sailors and navigate spice ships from the Indies. It was because of her brave mariners that Stavoren had gained her glory and greatness, being famed in all the land. But now, within so short a time, the city's renown and wealth had faded like a dream. By degrees, the population diminished, commerce became a memory, and ships a curiosity. The people that were left had to eat rye and barley bread instead of wheat. Floods ruined the farmers and washed away large parts of the town, so that dikes had to be built to save what was left. More terrible than all, the ocean waves rolled in and wiped out cities. Towns and farms, sinking churches, convents, monasteries, warehouses, wharves, and docks, in one common ruin, hidden far down below. To this day the worthless wheat patch that spoiled Stavoren is called Vrouwen Zand, or the Lady's Sand. Instead of being the staff of life, as nature intended, the wheat, because of a power of evil greater than that of 1,000 wicked fairies, became the menace of death to ruin a rich city. No wonder the Dutch have a proverb, which might be thus translated: peevishness perverts wheat into weeds, but a sweet temper turns a field into gold. Why the stork loves Holland. Above all countries in Europe, this bird, wise in the head and long in the legs, loves Holland. Flying all the way from Africa, the stork is at home among dikes and windmills. Storks are seen by the thousands in Holland and Friesland. Sometimes they strut in the streets, not in the least frightened or disturbed. They make their nests among the tiles and chimneys, on the red roofs of the houses, and they rear their young even on the church towers. If a man sets an old cartwheel flat on a tree top, the storks accept this, as an invitation to come and stay. At once they proceed, first of all, to arrange their toilet after their long flight. They do this, even before they build their nest. You can see them, by the hour, preening their feathers and combing their plumage with their long bills. Then, as solemnly as a boss mason, they set about gathering sticks and hay for their house. They never seem to be in a hurry. A stork lays on a bit of wood, and then goes at his toilet again, looking around to see that other folks are busy. Year after year, a pair of storks will use the same nest, rebuilding, or repairing it, each springtime. The stork is a steady citizen and does not like to change. Once treated well in one place, by the landlord, Mr. and Mrs. Stork keep the same apartments and watch over the family cradle inside the house, to see that it is always occupied by a baby. The return of the stork is, in Holland, a household celebration. Out in the fields, Mr. Stork is happy indeed, for Holland is the paradise of frogs, so the gentleman of the red legs finds plenty to eat. He takes his time for going to dinner, and rarely rushes for quick lunch. After business hours in the morning, he lays his long beak among his thick breast feathers, until it is quite hidden. Then, perched up in the air on one long leg, like a stilt, he takes a nap, often for hours. With the other leg crossed, he seems to be resting on the figure 4-4. Towards evening he shakes out his wings, flaps them once or twice, and takes a walk, but he is never in haste. Beginning his hunt, he soon has enough frogs, mice, grubs, worms or insects to make a good meal. It is because this bird feels so much at home, in town and country, making part of the landscape, that we so associate together. Holland and the stork, as we usually do. The Dutch proverb pictures the scene, which is so common. In the same field, the cow eats grass, the greyhound hunts the hare, and the stork helps himself to the frogs. Indeed, if it were not for the stork, Holland would, like old Egypt, in the time of Moses, be overrun with frogs. The Dutch call the stork by the sweet name, ooievaar, or the treasure bringer. Every springtime, the boys and girls, fathers and mothers, shout welcome to the white bird from Egypt. What do you bring me, is their question or thought. If the bird deserts its old home on their roof, the family is in grief, thinking it has lost its luck, but if Daddy Stork, with Mrs. Stork's approval, chooses a new place for their nest, there is more rejoicing in that house than if money had been found. Where there are nestlings on the roof, there will be babies in the house, is what the Dutch say, for both are welcome. To tell why the stork loves Holland, we must go back to the Africa of 1,000,000 years ago. Then, we shall ask the Dutch fairies how they succeeded in making the new land, in the West, so popular in the stork world. For what reason did the wise birds emigrate to the cold country 1,000 miles away? They were so regular and punctual, that a great prophet wrote, "Yea, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times." Ages ago, there were camels and caravans in Africa, but there was no Holland, for the land was still under the waves. In India, also, the stork was an old bird that waded in the pools and kept the frogs from croaking in terms of the multiplication table. Sometimes the stork population increased too fast and some went hungry for food, for the proverb tells us that a stork died while waiting for the ocean to dry, hoping to get a supply of dried fish. When on the coast of the North Sea, the land of 1,000,000 islands was made, the frog emigrants were there first. They poured in so fast that it seemed a question as to who should own the country, frogs or men. Some were very big, as if ambitious to be bulls. They croaked so loud that they drowned out the fairy music and made the night hideous with their noises. The snakes spoiled the country for the little birds, while the toads seemed to think that the salt ocean had been kept out and the land made, especially for them. The Dutch fairies were disgusted at the way these reptiles behaved, for they could not enjoy themselves, as in the old days. If they went to dance in the meadow, on moonlight nights, they always found a big bullfrog sitting in their ring, mocking them with its bellowing. So when they heard about the storks in Africa, and what hearty appetites they had for the various wrigglers, crawlers, jumpers and splashers in the waters, they resolved to invite them, in a body, to Holland. The Dutch fairies knew nothing of the habits of the bird and scarcely imagined how such a creature might look. But they heard many pleasant things about the stork's good character. The wise bird had an excellent reputation, not only for being kind to its young, but also for attending to the wants of its parents when they were old. It was even said that in some countries the stork was the symbol for filial piety. So the fairies of all the Netherlands dispatched a delegation to Egypt, and a congress of storks was called to consider this invitation to go west. Messengers were at once sent to all the red-legged birds, among the bulrushes of the Nile, or that lived on the roofs of the temples, or that perched on the pyramids, or dwelt on the top of old columns, or that stood in rows along the eaves of the town houses. The town birds gained their living by acting as street cleaners, but the river birds made their meals chiefly on fish, frogs, and mice. The invitation was discussed in stork meeting, and it was unanimously accepted. Except by some old grannies and grandpops that feared in the strange land they would not be well fed. On a second motion, it was agreed that only the strongest birds should attempt the flight. Those afraid, or too weak to go, must stay behind and attend to the old folks. Such a rattle of mandibles was never heard in Egypt before, as when this stork meeting adjourned. Now when storks travel, they go in flocks. Thousands of them left Egypt together. High in the air, with their broad wings spread and their long legs stretched out behind them, they covered Europe in a few hours. Then they scattered all over the marshy lands of the new country. It was agreed that each pair was to find its own home. When the cold autumn should come, they were to assemble again for flight to Egypt. It was a new sight for the fairies, the frogs and the men, to look over the landscape and see these snow-white strangers. They were so pretty to look at, while promenading over the meadows, wading in the ponds and ditches, or standing silently by the river banks. Soon, however, these foreign birds were very unpopular in Bullfrogland, and as for the snakes, they thought that Holland would be ruined by these hungry strangers. On the other hand, it was good news, in Fairyland, that all fairies could dance safely on their meadow rings, for the bullfrogs were now afraid to venture in the grass, lest they should be gobbled up, for the frogs could not hide from the storks. The new birds could poke their big bills so far into the mud holes, that no frog, or snake, big or little, was safe. The storks' red legs were so long, and the birds could wade in such deep water, that hundreds of frogs were soon eaten up. And there were many widows and orphans in the ponds and puddles. When the fairies got more acquainted with their new guests, and saw how they behaved, they nearly died of laughing. They were not surprised at their diet or eating habits, but they soon discovered that the storks were not songbirds. Instead of having voices, they seemed to talk to each other by clattering their long jaws, or snapping their mandibles together. Their snowy plumage, all being white but their wing feathers, was admired, was envied, and their long bright-colored legs were a wonder. At first the fairies thought their guests wore red stockings. And they thought how heavy must be the laundry work on wash days, for in Holland, everything must be clean. Of all creatures on earth, as the fairies thought, the funniest was seen when Mr. Stork was in love. To attract and please his lady love, he made the most grotesque gestures. He would leap up from the ground and move with a hop, skip, and jump. Then he spread out his wings, as if to hug his beloved. Then he danced around her, as if he were filled with wine. All the time he made the best music he knew how, by clattering his mandibles together. He intended this performance for a sort of love ditty or serenade. The whole program was more amusing than anything that an ape, goat, or donkey could get up. How the fairies did laugh! Yet the fairies were very grateful to the storks for ridding their meadows of so much vermin. How these delicate-looking, snow-white and graceful creatures could put so many snails, snakes, tadpoles, and toads into their stomachs and turn them into snow-white feathers. Wonderful wings and long legs, as red as a rose, was a mystery to them. It seemed more wonderful than anything which they could do. But as fairies have no stomachs and do not eat, this whole matter of digestion was a mystery to them. Besides the terror and gloom in the frog world, every reptile winced and squirmed when he heard of this new enemy. All crawlers, creepers, and jumpers had so long imagined that the land was theirs and had been made solely for their benefit. Nor did they know how to conquer the storks. The frog daddies could do nothing, and the frog mothers were every moment afraid to let either the tadpoles or froggies go out of their sight. They worried lest they should see their babies caught up in a pair of long, bony jaws, as sharp as scissors, there to wriggle and crow, until their darlings disappeared within the monster. One anecdote of the many that were long told in the old Dutch frog ponds was this, showing into what clangers curiosity may lead youngsters. We put it in quotation marks to show that it was told as a true story, and not printed in a book or made up. A tadpole often teased its froggy mother to let it go and see a red pole, of which it had heard from a traveler. Mrs. Frog would not at first let her son go, but promised that as soon as the tadpole lost his tail, and his flippers had turned into 4 legs, and his hind quarters had properly sprouted, so that he could hop out of danger, he might then venture on his travels. She warned him, however, not to go too near to that curious red pole, of which he had heard. Nobody as yet found out just what this red thing, standing in the water, was. But danger was suspected by old heads, and all little froggies were warned to be careful and keep away. In reality, the red stick was the leg of a stork, sound asleep, for it was taking its usual afternoon nap. The frogs on the bank, and those in the pool that held their noses above water, to get their breath, had never before seen anything like this red stilt, or its cross pole, for no bird of this sort had ever before flown into their neighborhood. They never suspected that it was a stork, with its legs shaped like the figure 4-4. Indeed, they knew nothing of its long bill, that could open and shut like a trap, catching a frog or snake, and swallowing it in a moment. Unfortunately for this uneducated young frog, that had never traveled from home, it now went too near the red pole, and, to show how brave it was, rubbed its nose against the queer thing. Suddenly the horrible creature, that had only been asleep, woke up and snapped its jaws. In a moment, a wriggling froggy disappeared from sight into the stomach of a monster, that had 2 red legs, instead of 1. At the sight of such gluttony, there was an awful splash, for a whole row of frogs had jumped from the bank into the pool. After this, it was evident that Holland was not to belong entirely to the frogs. As for the human beings, they were so happy over the war with the vermin and the victory of the storks, that they made this bird their pride and joy. They heaped honors upon the stork as the savior of their country. They placed boxes on the roofs of their houses for these birds to nest in. All the old cartwheels in the land were hunted up. They sawed off the willow trees a few feet above the ground, and set the wheels in flat, which the storks used as their parlors and dressing rooms. As for the knights, they placed the figure of the stork on their shields, banners, and coats of arms, while citizens made this bird prominent on their city seals. The capital of the country, The Hague, was dedicated to this bird, and, for all time, a pond was dug within the city limits, where storks were fed and cared for at the public expense. Even today, many a good story, illustrating the tender affection of The Hague, storks for their young, is told and enjoyed as an example to Dutch mothers to be the best in the world. Out in the country at large, in any of the 11 provinces, whenever they drained a swamp, or pumped out a pond to make a village, it was not looked upon as a part of Holland, unless there were storks. Even in the new wild places they planted stakes on the pumped-out dry land, called polders. On the top of these sticks were laid as invitations for the stork families to come and live with the people. Along the roads they stuck posts for storks' nests. It became a custom with farmers, when the storks came back, to kill the fatted calf or lamb, and leave the refuse meat out in the fields for a feast to these bird visitors. A score of Dutch proverbs exist, all of them complimentary to the bird that loves babies and cradles. Last of all, the Dutch children, even in the reign of Queen Wilhelmina, made letter carriers of their friends the treasure bringers. Tying tiny slips of paper to their red legs, they sent messages, in autumn, to the boys and girls in the old land of the Sphinx and pyramids, of Moses, and the children of Israel. In the springtime, the children's return messages were received in the country which bids eternal welcome to the bird named the bringer of blessings. This is why the storks love Holland. The end.